This is the tutorial walkthrough video for PCTC 2020-2021 round 2 question 4 game over Choco. Now firstly, I wish I could play this game, but essentially this person's going to keep eating chocolate and every 10 seconds they're going to draw a card. The value of the card is going to change their score or their running total, and their score at every 10 seconds has to meet a certain threshold score for them to continue eating. And if it doesn't meet the score, they stop eating and the game ends. And our goal is to take in a series of cards that are being drawn and output the amount of total seconds that this person was eating for. Now, one thing to note about this question is it says ignore any subsequent cards in our input. So that means like we firstly don't know how many cards we're going to be inputting, right? We might be inputting 1, we might be inputting 13, we have no clue. But also, we don't really care about all of the cards we're inputting. So even if we're inputting 13 cards, we might only care about the first 3 because maybe our player doesn't meet the required score after card 3 is drawn. And so with a question like this, when we don't know how many inputs we're getting, we should use a while loop, an infinite while loop. Like kind of infinite, but we use an infinite. I'm going to use an infinite while loop. And then I'm going to say if a condition is met, so if the player cannot continue to keep eating, then let's break out to the while loop. Let's stop taking any more inputs and let's just print off the answer. So let's make that while loop now, and let's input the card. So the card is going to be equal to the input. Now, of course, one problem with that is that the card could either be a number as a string or a letter. And if it's a letter, that's just a bit annoying because I would ordinarily like to do this. So I convert the card into a number and use that value. But we can't do that because some of the values are going to be TJ, like letters essentially. And so my solution to that is going to be, I'm going to take in the input and I'm just going to replace all of the letters with the value of that card. So I'm going to replace A with 1. I'm going to replace T with, I think it's 10. Then I'm going to replace J with 11. Then I'm going to replace Queen with 12. And finally, I'm going to replace King with 13. And just note that when I replace these letters, I'm going to have to replace them with a string of the number, right? Because you can't replace a string with a number in Python. You can only replace a string with a string. But yeah, essentially what this does is that we've now taken in our input and we've changed it so that we now know it's going to be a number. And that basically just lets us turn it into an integer like that, nice and easily, without any errors. What are we going to do to this integer? Well, we need to add it to our running score, or running total, our score. So let's add that to our score. But of course, we need to create the score right at the beginning of the code, and that's initially equal to 0. We should probably also keep track of time, so time is also initially equal to 0. Now, after we've added after we've added the value of the card to our score, we also need to increase time by 1 unit. In this case, I'm going to say 1 unit represents 10 seconds of time, and you'll see why we're doing that. So yeah, because we only draw the card after we have done 10 seconds, and so we have to ensure that we increase the time before we do the check to see whether we can continue playing. So speaking of the check, let's do the check now. So if their score is smaller than the required score. What's the required score? The required score is time multiplied by 7. And this is why I kept time as increments of 1 as opposed to increments of 10, because it allows us to do this really simple maths just to save a bit of time when programming. So yeah, if their score is smaller than the required score, which at any point in time is equal to time multiplied by 7, because it increases by 7 as every unit of time increases, then we want to break out of this while loop, and we also just want to print off their total score. No, not their total score. We want to print off the time that they were eating for. So that's going to be equal to time times 10. Because remember, we only increment time by 1 at each point, whereas that's actually meant to represent 10 seconds. Does that work? Awesome.